So, chapter 304. We learned a lot in this chapter. So much in this chapter. We learned that this guy is the fourth user of One for All. We learned that this person had an indirect play in everyone inside of One for All realizing what they are. We learned that this guy's quirk is actually One for All and it belongs to him. And we learned that this guy may be the final user of One for All, period. And that's not even what I'm going to be talking about in this video, because in this video, I'm actually going to be talking about the theory that I put out last week and to provide a new theory with new information in this chapter. So yeah, we're going to get right into that after this intro. All right, hit it. Hey guys, how's it going? It is your boy, Big Blue Drew 97 here, coming at you with another manga chapter discussion theory video discussing everything or a lot that happened in manga chapter 304 of My Hero Academia, as well as I have a new theory that I want to provide to the audience, because when it comes to this chapter, we learned a lot, and I do mean a lot, about the quirk of One for All. We learned its secrets, we learned its drawbacks, we learned about the users, and we learned about how a particular individual, due to his interactions, basically showed the previous users of One for All what truly is One for All as a quirk and how it has affected other individuals' lives. And I want to talk about all of that very soon, but there's still one topic that I really want to get to, and it's kind of like a theory that I put out the other last week, talking about what I thought was going to happen with the chapter, what I thought was going to happen to All Might, and the theory itself was somewhat disproven, but it was somewhat confirmed, and I'll talk more about that in this video. But before I do that, I'd like to ask you, if you haven't done so, to subscribe to my YouTube channel if you like this type of content, if you like the theories, if you want to see more discussion, or if you just enjoy my type of content. Leave a like on this video, as well as subscribe to my YouTube channel. And without the way, let's get right into the theory. So, when it comes to my original theory about All Might and his connection to One for All, first of all, go watch that video first before you watch this, because that'll give you a little bit more context to what the theory is. Or you can actually go on to Reddit, because I actually made a Reddit post about the theory, and I think that theory on my Reddit post is probably a little bit more better. So if you want to go look it up, it's under Big Blue Drew 97. You can try to look up that post. I don't have that many, but I think that will also be good to look at, because that gives a better understanding of my mindset when I was thinking of this theory. Because my theory basically was this, that the reason why All Might was in that flame light state was because he was quirkless, and because he was quirkless, and because he didn't have a quirk to give to the quirk factor of One for All, that his consciousness would not completely be passed down to the quirk. That's the entire theory in itself, and I explained a little bit more of it in the video as well as in the Reddit post. But in actuality, that theory was wrong to an extent, and let me explain. When it comes to what we learned in 304, we learned that his consciousness, that All Might's consciousness, that Toshinori's consciousness, is actually inside of the quirk of One for All, but it's kind of different from what the other consciousness and the other quirks are, because we also learned that when it comes to the previous users of One for All, they were questioning whether or not they were the souls of the previous users, but because of the interference from All for One and how he explained how when it comes to quirks and the quirk factors, that it has a piece of their consciousness in there, they realized that all they were the remnant of these other people's consciousness. And from that context, because there's the remnants of that person's consciousness, you would think that the moment that they put the quirk inside of One for All, that their consciousness will only retain the information up until the point where that person passed on the quirk to someone else. And that could be seen as such because we know for a fact that when it comes to these other users, that they didn't know any of the information from the previous users, nor could they interact with these other users up until 4 months ago within the current story of My Hero Academia, during the time that Deku was training it. That was the time where they started to gather the information and try to understand what One for All as a quirk is, and they basically got it down, and they basically come to the conclusion that if you have a quirk and then you gain One for All, it hammers at your life force and it basically speeds up your life. And if you have it for long enough, it will cause you to die of old age unless you are quirkless. And that kind of ties into the second part of my theory. The first part of the theory was wrong. All Might's consciousness was passed down to One for All because for some apparent reason, One for All became All Might's quirk, meaning that he gained a quirk factor, which something interesting about that is that something that I had a question about when it came to All Might is that if he was quirkless, how could he have like a quirk factor? And that's something else that they bring up here, is how can Toshinori have like brought down his consciousness, because it is confirmed that his consciousness is inside the quirk. How could he have done that if he didn't have a quirk to begin with? And that's the thing that bothered me, is that when it came to the first My Hero Academia movie, I think it was Two Heroes. Yeah, it was Two Heroes. You had Shield. I forgot his name, but Shield, and he was like monitoring All Might's quirk factor. And I always thought that was weird, because if he was quirkless, he wouldn't have a quirk factor. Well, in this chapter, it's confirmed that he does have a quirk factor because he inherited the quirk of One for All. So it like gave him a quirk factor, and One for All basically became his quirk. And something interesting about that, and it kind of ties into the second part of my theory, which may actually be like actually correct, is because he was quirkless, but then One for All became a part of his quirk. But as we see in this chapter, as well as previously, he's the only person so far who actually is like the representation of One for All. He is that fiery vestige, and most likely the reason why he looks like that is because One for All became a part of All Might, became his quirk, and therefore his consciousness represented the quirk itself of One for All, which represents like a fire and an ember. So with that idea in mind, the second part of my theory for why All Might looks completely different in this vestige world could be tied to the fact that he started out quirkless and that One for All became his quirk. And that ties into a new theory that I have. And the reason why I have this new theory is because something else that we learned in this chapter is that even though All Might passed on his consciousness to One for All, he's still able to be connected to it in a way where they're able to share information. That's the reason why the fourth user, Ikage Shinomori, was able to learn that he died of old age, and not because he had a rare disease or because he thought that he didn't train enough. And that's very weird, because like I said, if they passed on their quirk factor to One for All prior, then they wouldn't have had that information to begin with, but yet they're still able to gain new information through Toshinori, because his consciousness in One for All and Deku is still connected to All Might's actual conscious, and that's weird. And I think that is explained by the fact that One for All became his quirk, which makes him have that inherent connection to it, as well as the fact that he was quirkless, so it just became a part of him. And that would explain why he was such unnatural with that quirk. And that's where we get to my theory. My theory that I wanted to pose to the audience, and just to the ether as well, is that when All Might dies, and he is going to die eventually in this series, that when he dies, I think his consciousness inside of One for All will disappear and be replaced with Deku's consciousness. And here's why I think that. So in the chapter 304, like I said, we learned that All Might is able to share his thoughts and information through the conscience inside of One for All. In this chapter, we also learned that One for All became a part of Toshinori and basically became All Might's quirk, even though he was quirkless. Now, with that in mind, this could explain why All Might was such a natural with this quirk, and why when he used it, it didn't negatively affect his body, as well as could explain why he's able to go in between two different forms, because One for All became his quirk and gave him the ability to do that. But now we get to Deku. Deku is also quirkless, but yet he has a hard time dealing with the quirk and the power of One For All. And we know for a fact that One For All stockpiles power, and we know that Toshinori Yagi, All Might, has had the quirk for over 40 years and was able to put that power inside of it. So we could say that the reasoning why it's so stressful on Deku is because of all of the power that All Might stored and it has now given over to Deku. That could be the case, or it could be the case that the quirk itself hasn't fully acclimated to Deku's body and it hasn't truly become his own. Because we know for a fact that Deku eventually wants to make One For All his own quirk. He wants to use it. He wants to get away from how All Might used it. He wants to make it his own power, but he can't make it his own power if it still technically belongs to All Might. So what I think is going on is that when it comes to the quirk of One For All, if you're quirkless, it can become your quirk. You'll gain a quirk factor. It can be monitored. It'll basically be like you've had the quirk all of your life, and it will adjust to your body. But if you give that quirk to someone else that is quirkless, then they will have a harder time for it, because instead of it being like instantly adjusted to their new body, it would be just giving someone else another quirk. And with that in mind, I think that what we're seeing is that the connection between One For All and a quirkless individual is strong as long as that individual is alive, as seen that the ability for One For All's All Might conscious to gain information from his living counterpart. So with all of this in mind, a situation could occur where All Might sacrifices his life or is killed within the line of duty as a hero, and through his death, One For All will eventually be turned over to Deku. The consciousness will fade from One For All because its inherent connection to Toshinori. Basically, if Toshinori is alive, his consciousness will live inside the quirk One For All. But if he dies, I think that consciousness will disappear. And I think that that will have a thematic resonance with the story for a few reasons. For one reason, it will force Deku to grow more as a character, because a point that was brought up within the story and seen prevalently in the story is the parallels between Deku and Shigaraki, and how Shigaraki was able to grow as a villain when he lost his mentor in All For One, when he was sent to jail and he had to do a lot of things on his own. He grew as a person, he grew as a character, he physically grew stronger, and even All For One himself says that, oh yeah, that kid is never going to basically be anything if like All Might is still around and coddling him. That's why I let Shigaraki alone, so now he can grow. With that in mind, I think that is going to happen when All Might dies and Deku sees his death. If he tries to contact All Might inside of the vestige world, that would not be able to allow him to grow. He would still have some reliance on All Might. He would still look up to him, and he would still like put more faith in him if he is still within the quirk. But if he disappears, then Deku has to do this all by himself. He has to grow, he has to change by himself without his mentor being there, and therefore he will grow stronger, and then One For All will become his quirk. And this is even seen more through Nana Shimura, where she was still alive and talking to Toshinori. She said that she had these visions before, and how she thinks that it would be a romantic to still be able to live inside of someone else, inside the quirk of One For All. But in the case of All Might, it wouldn't be romantic. It would be tragic, and through that tragedy, Deku will grow as an individual. So, with like all those ideas in mind, like I said, I think the theory is that even though One For All is All Might's quirk, I think that the conscious and like his flame-like body is specifically tied to his life, and that if All Might were to die in the real world, the consciousness inside of One for All will disappear because of that inherent connection. And when that occurs, One for All will eventually be adjusted to Deku's body, where Deku could fully use the quirk of One for All, fully use the 6 quirks without the detriment of hurting his body. And most likely the reason why he's been hurting his body is because the quirk of One for All doesn't belong to him completely and still belongs to All Might. So if Deku were to ever fully control One for All and used 100% without hurting his body, All Might has to die. And through his death, Deku will be able to grow and develop as a character. So yeah, that's kind of the new theory that I have about All Might and the vestige inside of One for All. That could be right, it could be completely wrong. I can't say for certain, but this is how I'm viewing it right now. What do you think of the theory? Do you think that it's good? Do you think there's bad? Do you think that there are flaws in it? There probably is some that I'm not thinking of. Maybe I'm taking a different interpretation that you would. Leave your thoughts down in the comments below about what you thought of this theory, as well as what you thought of this chapter. If you want me to talk more about this chapter and more about everything that happened in it, I can. Or you could always watch a Taking 101's video. I think that he did a very good job basically summing up everything that happened. So if you want a more summarized version of that, go watch his channel. You probably know about him if you're watching me. So yeah, that's all I really have to say for this video. Hopefully you liked it, hopefully you enjoyed it. Leave a like if you liked it, leave a dislike if you didn't. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, leave a comment down below, do all of that cool jazz, and hopefully I'll be able to catch you in my next video. So goodbye.